Before Mr. Dlamini proceeds, Commissioner, I would like to give you an opportunity to address us, to welcome and address us. Over to you, Jody.
Jody, you may kick off.
We can't hear you, Jody. We can see you are speaking, but we can't hear you.
You see. Hi, Nebushne, can you hear me?
Definitely, we can hear you now. Thank you.
Great, thank you so much. And apologies for the issues with the sound. I think I'd listened in where Sanele was also just talking about some of the challenges that we have in terms of our beneficiaries, and roughly having about 1,600 beneficiaries who we are not able to process at this stage due to challenges and due to particularly due to the investigation that's being conducted by the SIU. I think part of the challenge around those payments, if I may, and I saw Saneli's was back on the meeting, is that when the SIU has launched an investigation, the NLC is not permitted to make any payments. So this then affects our ability and our commitments that we've made in terms of the grant agreement, but we then get interdicted from making those payments. So we are trying to work with the SIU in terms of, seeing how we can move these investigations quickly so that we can come to a conclusion. But I think Sanele can come in on also some of the default payments. We do also, unfortunately, have a register of some NPOs who haven't met their compliance requirements. And that would also be another factor that would inhibit us from making those payments to NPOs or NPCs. So, I think what we would like to do with the sector is work in terms of how we can ramp up compliance in terms of adherence to the conditions and the stipulations within the grant agreement, so that people are then able to access funding as a call opens. But those right now are the two big prohibitors on our side, Nobuhle, that's preventing us from making those payments. And I think, we also need to ensure from our side that our finances are in order, so that we remain a going concern, and so that we can continue disbursing funds and supporting beneficiaries in the ways that they need us to do. So unfortunately, compliance plays a major role in all of this. And those are some of the things that we're working on. We've started some initiatives in the NPO sector. Some of the associations and institutions have also been reaching out to me so that we can see how we can best drive up compliance within the sector to enable a much more robust response. Thank you. I wasn't sure if it was just questions and answers or if you needed something more from me, but let me hand over to you.
Thank you so much, Jody. I think you've covered it very well. There would have been an aspect of the NLC mandates and issues around funding for impact. But I think maybe as we proceed and we are taking the questions as well, we will request you to respond. Thank you. I think moving forward, Mr. Dlamini, are you ready?
Yeah, I'm back, Nobuhle. We just had a technical glitch, but I'm back. Yeah, thank you.
Thank you. Please
Can
proceed.
I take over now?
Yes, please.
All right. Okay. Let me just show my slide so that we can then move along. All right. Thank you very much. I think most important was for me to give a bit of a background. Thank you for the commissioner for going through the background and giving the the synopsis of what we are faced with as the NLC at the moment. But I'm just going to give a little bit of the NLC grant funding overview, just for our stakeholders to understand maybe a bit of a detail on what are the things that we are going through and what are the changes that we've put in place and what are the measures that we want to implement within the organization, just to make sure that we fund the right organizations that deserve to be funded. But for me to do that properly, I need to give a bit of a background in terms of the trends. What has happened at the NLC over a period of 5 years, maybe 4 years, just to give an overview of what type of organizations we fund and what kind of work we have been doing, just say from 2020 up till now, just so that you get a picture on the things that we do as the National Lotteries Commission. Now, some of the important trends that people will be grappling with, that want to understand, is how many applications does NLC fund? I know this will be very important information, because you would have come across a situation where you have been declined because the funds are depleted. That has been one of the key challenges that we've had to deal with. Just to give you a snapshot of what happens over the years, if you see that slide, it kind of reflects the stats in relation to the number of applications that the National Lotteries Commission gets to deal with. And we've given details in terms of the provincial spread as well, in terms of how many applications would have been processed by each province. Now, this is talking to the applications that would have been received from 2020. You would see that there would have been about 7,000 or just more than 7,000 applications, 21, 7,600. And in 2023, if I were to just zoom into that year, we received 9,417 applications, and this was just in July. Just half of the year, from the commencement, which was in April, up till July, we would have received already 9,417 applications. The stakeholders and the general public will recall that at that time, we then had to call for a closure of the call. We then stopped receiving applications. The reason for that would have been, we were looking at the number of applications, comparing it with what we had in our budget in terms of the financial year and the allocations that we're going to make. We need to be, as an organization, we need to be very cautious of creating unnecessary expectations. Because if we continue receiving applications and yet we know that we have exhausted the budget in terms of the number of the applications, we are then creating unnecessary expectations. So these are some of the things that have resulted in us trying to amend our processes and improve our processes so that we do not have to decline you for the reasons of funds depleted. So we are monitoring that very closely in the upcoming financial, or in the current financial year, just to make sure that we do not create unnecessary expectations. So just watch the space. There will be some measures that will be introduced in our application process that will seek to ensure that we do not get to a point where funds are depleted unnecessarily, so, and you have not been given an opportunity to access the funding. But the truth of the matter is, the cake is still as big, and if it's exhausted, we will communicate as such to say now the cake is exhausted. Just to give you another sneak preview, when we receive so many applications from 2020 to 2023, as it's reflected there in that graph, you would know that we then need to process these applications. Now, processing would refer to the capturing of the application. It would refer to the assessment of the application in terms of the compliance requirements. We will then have to do due diligence in all the applications in terms of your financial statements and all the requirements that we would have advertised at the commencement of the call. Now, once we've done that, then each application is subjected to an adjudication process, which is where now the distributing agency members will get to decide as to whether they allocate or they cannot allocate based on a lot of other reasons that they would have discussed in the session when they are adjudicating. Now, this slide here reflects the number of applications that would have been funded as against the applications that were received. In other words, if you see the 9,417, that is the total number of applications received. But in terms of the applications now funded, you would notice that the graph reflects that on a financial year basis, we fund around 2,500, 2,800 applications. So that then says the cake is not growing, and yet the demand is very high. So I think we also are inviting our stakeholders to bear with us in this one, because we are for collaborative funding. We are inviting other funders to join hands with us and support our social sector so that we get to uplift our communities. But we are also saying we need to work together to combat the corruption and fraud in our space, because some of the organizations that would have received the funding did not necessarily deserve the funding as per the reports that we are getting in relation to what the SIU is presenting to us, and maybe even the Auditor General is presenting to us. So some of these things, we need to work together to make sure that we protect our reserves and make sure that we expand the cake and support our general public. So in a nutshell, on a financial year basis, we fund more or less 30% of the applications that we receive. This is the fact based on the trends, and we seek to improve this picture and make sure that we do better as the National Lotteries Commission. That is why we are reviewing some of the processes and the systems within the organization. Also, some of the funding challenges that we get to encounter as the National Lotteries Commission is the issue of impact. The existence of the National Lotteries Commission is about impact. It's not about profit making. The National Lotteries Commission is not for profit, which is the reason why we maybe fund organizations that are not for profit. Now, what we seem to have a challenge with is we do not achieve the necessary impact that we seek to achieve with most of the applications that we receive. Or we either receive the minimum impact or no impact at all. What causes this? The cause for this is obviously the fraudulent applications that we receive, meaning some of the stakeholders and the organizations would submit applications for the sake of defrauding the system. So we just want to warn against this, because there will be systems in place and there will be processes that will seek to curb this. But over and above that, we have observed that over the years, we have focused our funding on the small grant applications. Now, the small grant would have not assisted us in terms of achieving the necessary impact that we seek to achieve. So you will then notice that our processes in the current financial year will then improve to ensure that even with the small grant, an impact can be achieved. So just be on the lookout for that. There will be minor changes on the small grant category as well, just to ensure that we fund the deserving organizations, but also to ensure that the minimum grant that we issue or we offer to our organizations or our stakeholders will also seek to achieve the necessary impact. But the other challenge that the NLC is faced with is the lack of accountability. I think the commissioner would have touched on this one in terms of compliance. There is the issue with organizations that do not account for the funds that would have been given by the National Lotteries Commission in a form of a grant. People just do not report on the progress of the project, and they do not come back to share with the National Lotteries Commission on how the project has fared or how the project has been delivered to the communities. This is creating another challenge in terms of the impact and also in terms of the accountability on its own. Therefore, the lottery cannot account to Parliament in terms of the work that we do. So it is creating a bit of a challenge for the lottery. We therefore plead with the stakeholders to say, please do account for every grant that you receive. We need the progress reports as per the grant agreement that you would have signed. But critical to all this, what would have brought us negative publicity is fraud and corruption. So this one, I think Commissioner also touched on it to say we need to work together to safeguard and protect the cake that we're supposed to distribute for the general public. Through fraud and corruption, a lot of money has gone to the wrong hands. So the systems that we are putting in place will seek to ensure that we only target deserving organizations with the fund that the NLC has accumulated for the financial year. So the issues of fraud and corruption will be dealt with the seriousness and the blow that it deserves. So we are not going to be tolerating any kind of fraud and corruption in our system. So just make sure that if you encounter any organization out there in the community that is attempting to defraud the National Lotteries Commission, you report it to the authorities, or maybe you bring it to the attention of the provincial office, or you may even contact our hotline and make sure that you report such activities, because it is for the benefit of the general public that we safeguard this fund for the benefit of the social sector. I think I'm going to get into a bit of the validation process, which is referring to the 1,600 organizations that the Commissioner made mention of in her opening. I'm just going to give you a little bit of a background. I think it was late last year in September, there would have been an alert that there are organizations that are processed for payment, and yet they do not deserve to be paid grants. Now, with that alert, this alert would have come from one of the big banks in the country. With that alert, we then had to take action as the National Lotteries Commission. We then introduced the three-pronged approach validation process. And this process seeks to validate the existence of every organization that is to be funded by the National Lotteries Commission. How is it implemented? The National Lotteries Commission officials will visit your organization and they will request your directors, your management committee to complete affidavits, and these affidavits must be signed by the South African Police Services. So in other words, these affidavits, you will then take them to SAPS, and then they must be stamped and signed by your nearest police station. But the second prong of the three-pronged approach is the confirmation of the banking details. We request each organization to submit a recent letter from the bank or a bank statement. The minimum should be 3 months old bank statement. You cannot submit anything beyond 3 months. The other prong for the validation process is obviously a template which will seek to confirm the objectives of the project the organization has applied for. And that exercise will also entail the communication with the stakeholders or the beneficiaries of the project. In other words, the officials will then interact with the beneficiaries of the organization just to confirm that the organization exists. So after the alert, that exercise would have been done across the country just to ensure that organizations that we fund are legitimate and also they are deserving for the grant that the NLC awards to deserving organizations. So that is the kind of an exercise that we've had to deal with. Now, having learned from that exercise, we now have introduced a new process in our value chain, which I think our stakeholders need to take note of. We now are going to do what is called the pre-adjudication site visits. In other words, for every application that is deserving of our grant, before we can process the payment, that application will be visited by our officials or by an independent body that we are going to appoint as the National Lotteries Commission. This is also to ensure that before we process for any payment, we do not pay into the wrong hands. So there is that introduction of a pre-adjudication site visit that we have conceptualized, and we are in the process of implementing the new financial year. So every project will now be visited. The visit will be conducted by the consultant or by the official of the NLC, and this we are talking physical site visit and not just a phone call or maybe an email, but we are talking physical site visit that will be conducted for every project that will be considered for funding. So these are new changes that will be coming, and we just are sharing with our stakeholders so that they are aware that these changes are there to improve the systems, but also to safeguard the cake that is supposed to improve their lives and benefit the general public in South Africa. The other very key issue that I need to share with the stakeholders is the issue of discontinuation of the agents. I think in the previous financial year, you would notice that we would have contracted agents that were assisting in terms of processing of the applications by our applicants, in terms of filling in the documents, in terms of ensuring that all the compliance documents are gathered and are submitted to our provincial offices. Now, we then learned that out of that exercise or out of that initiative, there would have been opportunists that took advantage of that very good initiative, but turned it around and posed as NLC officials and took advantage of our beneficiaries and took advantage of our stakeholders and our applicants. Now, because of that, we therefore have taken a decision as the National Lotteries Commission that we are going to stop or discontinue those agents. Now, I can safely say that as of the 31st of March 2023, the National Lotteries Commission does not have any approved or accredited agents. We do not operate with agents. For any stakeholder or applicant that wants to interact with the National Lotteries Commission, we request that you go to our provincial offices for support. This is from filling of the application right up to understanding all documents that are required in terms of compliance. You go to our provincial offices or you contact our contact center on a number that is displayed there, 086 0065 383. That is the number that you contact for our contact center. You will get the support that you need. And I also would like to request that you work with us, our stakeholders, for any person that is attempting or posing to attempt as the National Lotteries Commission's agent. Please report that person to our provincial office or to our fraud hotline, because that person will be defrauding the system again and reducing the cake that is intended for the good causes to benefit the general public. Now, I think there would have been a mention of the SIU and the list that would have been shared with the National Lotteries Commission earlier on, and the 1,600 organizations that are implicated in this. Now, in 2022, after the alert by this big bank, there would have then been delays in terms of processing of payment. The delays are due to the validation process that I would have highlighted earlier. It's a three-pronged approach, But it's surprising to mention that some of the organizations that would have applied, once we introduced the validation process, the organizations disappeared. We do have evidence of this. When we requested for affidavits, none of the directors and the management committee members came forward to fill in the affidavits. So it therefore means the validation process is working, because those organizations are then reflecting that they would have been, they would have applied not for the good causes, but for their self-benefit. So the validation process is a three-pronged approach, and it takes long just from the NLC's side to do the validation process. But also it should be noted that the bank itself also they have their own validation process that they need to go through before they can process the payment. So that is where the delay will come through. So we just would like to apologize to all our stakeholders for any inconvenience that is caused by this. But I also believe that it is necessary that we go through this so that we can only pay legitimate organizations that deserve to be funded. Now, just to touch on the issue of the measures that we adopted to ensure that we curb on some of these wrongdoings, especially around the compliance issues. You're talking about people that do not, or organizations that do not account for the funds. We have established a delinquency register. I think this has been in place, but we've just improved on it and making sure that we monitor it very closely from this financial year going forward. This says failure to account for a grant will land the organization in the delinquency register. In other words, for every grant that you have been afforded or you've been granted, you then need to account as per the grant agreement. Failure to account in line with the grant agreement, you will then be registered in a delinquency register after having followed the due processes. In other words, there are processes like your reminder letters and all those which are aligned to the Administrative Justice Act and so on and so forth. Now, the delinquency register would mean subsequent tranches will be withdrawn. For instance, in other words, if your funding was granted to you in different tranches, 2 or 3 tranches, and you've received the first tranche, it therefore means the second and the third tranche you will not receive, it will be withdrawn. And also, your organization will be subjected to investigation. But further to that, we will then subject you to a recovery process. In other words, even the first grant, after the investigation has been conducted and it has been established that you were intending to do wrong, you were not intending to do the good causes, you will then, the funds will then be recovered from you. Now, in some cases, we have gone to the extent of referring the matters to the South African Police Services for criminal charges, because some organizations through our investigation processes have been found to defraud the organization, and their intention was more corruption and not necessarily intended to do good causes. So this is now a warning to all our stakeholders and all the organizations that intend to work with the National Lotteries Commission, that we are here and we are monitoring the processes, and we want to make sure that the funds are for the good causes and they go to deserving organizations. Nobuhle, thank you very much. I think this is my last slide. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Mr. Dlamini. That was quite an insightful presentation. And I think you have really made a very clear emphasis on what is expected from our applicants or prospective applicants and grant holders. I think maybe just as an addition, Mr. Dlamini, if you can also touch on how our funding works in terms of, you know, the grant sizes and maybe just those few changes on the on accessing a small grants. And maybe if you can just on a high level, just touch on that. Thank you.
Thank you, Nobuhle. I think that one I could touch on it. For instance, our grants are categorized in 3 categories. We've got a small grant, a medium grant, and a large grant. Now, in terms of the small grant, our stakeholders will recall that over the years, we would have minimum requirements in relation to the small grant. But as from this financial year, we have kind of intensified the requirements in relation to the small grant. This is all intended to ensure that we fund the deserving organizations, and also to ensure that we fund organizations that will be able to account in terms of the money that we would have supported them with, the grant that would have supported them with. Now, what do I mean intensified? Intensified is referring to the requirements for the small grant. Previously, the small grant would qualify with a bank account in the name of the organization and a registration certificate, and then obviously the business plan, the motivation, the IDs, and all the other requirements. Now, the introduction, which is also in the regulations, in other words, we are implementing the regulations as they are. We are now saying, if you are an organization and you've only been in existence for less than 6 months, you therefore cannot apply at the National Lotteries Commission on your own. You will need to be supported by an established organization, because we need to test for compliance from that established organization. Therefore, between yourself as a small grant applicant and the assisting organization, you will then have to have an agreement as to how you are going to implement the project. But from our perspective, we expect you to also sign a capacity building form, which comes with our documents that we've shared on our various platforms, on our website and different other platforms, but also they'll be accessible from the various provinces. Then if you are older than 6 months in existence, but you are not at a stage where you could produce the financial statements, in other words, you are less than 12 months, but over than 6 months in existence, we then are saying to you, as a small grant applicant, you must submit to us at least the management accounts, so that we show to us that you've got systems in place to manage the finances. We need to see your expenditure reports. Just share with us as to how you manage the finances in your organization. But on top of that, you will then have to give us your bank statement, just to make sure that we've got the right organization. And the bank statement must be in the name of the organization. So without those management accounts, we will not be able to consider your application going forward. We'll have to advise you, and you may have to go back and get those documents in place. Now, if you have been in existence beyond the time of you producing the financial statements, we then expect you that you will submit to the NLC the financial statements, just like your act would require you to submit the financial statements. For instance, if you are a non-profit organization, we know that the Non-Profit Act requires that NPO submit financial statements. So you need to submit that with the National Lotteries Commission as well. So those are the changes, particularly with the small grant that we are introducing. Over and above that, we therefore have ensured that we validate with other databases, including the CIPC database. We will now have to check the status of the directors of each of those NPCs, and each of those NPOs, we then have to check the management committee in terms of compliance status of each and everyone that is involved in terms of that initiative. So those are some of the measures that we are putting in place just to make sure that we ensure that the cake goes to the deserving hands and we fund the right organizations. I don't know whether I've covered you, Nobuhle, on that one. Thank you very much.
Yes, definitely. Thank you so much, Mr. Dlamini. Maybe just to mention to our viewers, our stakeholders, that the details that Mr. Dlamini has just alluded to are well detailed in our guidelines that have been uploaded up into our website. So please do take time to read further so that you can understand and understand these changes as you prepare your application. Without wasting any time, I'm going to ask Sarah to present to the participants and on how NLC, the NLC approach to determining funding focus areas per sector. Are you ready, Sarah?
I am ready, Nobuhle, now that I've found the unmute button. Thank you so much.
You're welcome. Please go ahead.
Yes, I also have a presentation, so I'm just going to share my screen. Okay, so welcome everybody. I'm glad you could join us this afternoon. I'm sure this is the part of the presentation that most of you are here for. You're all wanting to know about the funding focus areas for the 2023-24 call for applications. So I'll just take you through a little bit of the background, how we got here, and then I'm going to go through each of the sector programs one by one so that there's an understanding of how we've packaged the call for this year. And then there will be an opportunity for questions of clarity before the end of the webinar. So the presentation will cover, as I said, the background, then we'll look at each of the sectors one by one, starting with charities, which is the biggest sector, then going to arts, culture and national heritage, sport and recreation, and then lastly, miscellaneous. So in terms of background, as Sanele has mentioned, there have been quite a lot of internal work that has been done over the past year since the new board came into office, and also since the new commissioner joined us in February. And essentially what the new board asked us to do as management when they came in was to just review our grant funding model to make sure that it was correctly positioned, correctly aligned, and that it was actually going to achieve the intended results. And as a result of that very in-depth review process, we made a renewed commitment to our mandate, which is to fund for impact. So the way that we've tried to craft the call is to move us closer towards that intention of funding impactful projects rather than just short-term and smaller amounts with less impact at the end of the day. So the programmatic approach that we started to introduce about 2 years ago has been reinforced. So essentially what we're looking for is comprehensive, holistic and longer term approaches to addressing and tackling some of the social and other issues that organizations are set up to address. We had a research and consultation process, which included things like an environmental scan, looking around at all of the sort of big indicator statistics around poverty and employment and food security and so on, as well as sector-specific research that was done for each of the different programs and sectors. We also looked at the results of evaluations that had been conducted or commissioned during the previous period, as a way to inform how we should craft the call moving forward. We had a lot of consultations with stakeholders, for example, with the departments, our key departments of sports, arts and culture, social development, as well as agriculture. And then we did internal reviews and consultations with the distributing agencies and with the operational staff working on the grant funding side of the business, including at a provincial level. So that all of that input was taken into consideration when we developed the call. We also have developed a theory of change for each sector or program, and this will give us a much more coherent framework for assessing applications as well as monitoring of programs. And I'll talk a little bit more about the theory of change later on in the slides. In terms of a timeline, we started looking at the research and formulation of version 1 in around the third quarter of last year. Then the consultations happened earlier this year. We formulated version 2 in March, and then by the end of March, it went to our executive committee for approval and noting by the board. And then the final version was uploaded in early April. So it was a fairly compressed timeline for us this year, but we did manage to get to the end of the road eventually. So in terms of the theory of change, I'm just going to give a very high-level view of what a theory of change is. I won't take you through each of the individual theories of change because then we'd be here until 6 o'clock, and I'm sure none of us have time for that. But just so that you're aware of the thinking behind the theory of change. So the theory of change starts with defining the problem or the opportunity that exists in the particular area or sector or program where we want to intervene. And then from there, we define the goals. Okay, so this is the problem. So what is our ultimate goal? So we start with the impact statement, which is the long-term impact that we want to have or contribute towards. And then we work backwards to long-term, medium, and short-term goals. And this defines the change pathways. So each goal builds on the others. So the short-term builds towards the medium-term medium-term builds towards the long-term, and the long-term builds towards the overall impact. Then once we've done that, we design the interventions, what we think will help us get towards the achievement of these different goals. We define the outputs that each project is expected to produce, or each program is expected to produce. And then we obviously have a monitoring, evaluation, reporting, and learning framework, which is based on using the theory of change as the kind of guiding framework. And we agree on how we're going to monitor and evaluate each step of the process. And then at the end, we come towards an analysis and we say, okay, does the theory hold? Does it still make sense? Is there anything that we need to tweak or change? Where are our assumptions correct? And so on. So that's how the theory of change helps us to be clearer about how the journey that we need to take to get to the ultimate objective of the long-term goal. So I'll move on now to the charities sector programs for 2023-24. And this year, there are 5 programs under charities. So we still have some of the ones that you're probably familiar with, the Early Childhood Development Program, the Gender-Based Violence Program, Protection of the Vulnerable. And this year, we've introduced 2 additional programs. One is around food security, and the other one is around animal welfare. And this was based on our analysis, as well as input from the various stakeholders of the need to add these 2 programs under charities, because they definitely will make a contribution and address a particular need in communities. So the preamble for each of the sectors is fairly similar. But obviously each sector has a different goal. So the overall goal for charities is to contribute to the sustainable development of poor communities, poverty alleviation, and protection and support for vulnerable groups through the provision of integrated holistic services. So that is our long-term goal. When we're looking at applications, we're going to obviously give preference to applications that will help us to achieve that long-term goal. So they must respond to the social and economic challenges that are identified in underdeveloped areas. And we would want to see in your business plan a motivation as to why that particular program is necessary. We want to see programs that advance the interests and participation of particular target groups. So we always prioritize women, youth, and people with disabilities. We also want to contribute to job creation and retention in the sector. So programs must demonstrate that they are going to lead to job creation or retention, as well as aligning to the priorities of government. Obviously, we are an agency of government, so everything that we do has to be aligned to government priorities as reflected in the National Development Plan, as well as the Economic Reconstruction and Recovery Plan. So applicants will be expected to demonstrate that they have the requisite capacity. So that means, do you have the right personnel with the necessary skills and qualifications and experience, as well as organizational systems to manage the program that you intend to implement? So that's a very important part of the application process. Can you actually deliver on what you say you're going to deliver? We have also put in this additional thematic support element. So this is for programs 1 through 3, which is the ECD, the GBV, and the vulnerable groups. So organizations that are applying for support under those 3 programs can elect to also include in their application these 2 elements. The one is around food security. So things like community gardens or permaculture initiatives. If you're in an urban area, obviously you might not have land, but there are other innovative ways of growing food in urban settings. So any micro agriculture initiative that is linked to or integrated with your existing community development initiative or your service. And the intention here is to supplement and improve the nutritional status of the residents of your facility or of the clients that you serve. So it's a way just of adding a little bit of extra programmatic work in terms of, is there enough food security for the people that we're working with? Can we supplement it in some way to make sure that people have enough food to eat as well as good quality food to eat? Then the other one is around climate change mitigation. This is obviously a big concern for sub-Saharan Africa. We're one of the worst affected regions in the world, even though we've contributed the least in terms of emissions. But what we want to try and do is to say, is there a way for us to support you to adapt your new or your existing facilities for improved resilience to some of the climate changes that we see happening? So, for example, if you want to install a renewable energy system, looking at things like rainwater harvesting or energy efficiency, improving the energy efficiency of your buildings, as well as greening of buildings and environments. So that's another elective element that you can add to your program if you can motivate that it would add value and is necessary to improve the quality of your service delivery. So these funding streams are not standalone, as I said, but they're additional measures to be supported as part of programs 1 through 3. Right, moving on to early childhood development. The overall goal is to contribute to the development of children under 7 from disadvantaged communities to realize their cognitive, emotional, social, and physical potential. And we've developed, for the purposes of the call, we've just defined the short-term and medium-term outcomes, because that's what organizations will need to focus on. So in the short term, we want to see an increase in the number of children from low-income households accessing quality ECD services, and then job creation and retention in the sector. In the medium term, we'll be looking for improved quality of learning, teaching, and care in those facilities, as well as improved school readiness of children. So those will form part of our evaluation criteria when we're looking at this particular program. In terms of interventions to be funded, because we're taking a programmatic approach, we want to make sure that it is a holistic service. So we're saying that when your application comes, we want to see a combination of 3 or more of the following interventions. So obviously general support, that's where we start in terms of operational costs, food and so forth, and all of the basic things that an ECD center needs to run. You can also look for funding for maintaining or improving your existing facilities, as well as the construction of ablution facilities, if that is necessary, if that is a requirement, both in terms of the facility itself, but also in meeting the norms and standards of the Department of Basic Education. Provision of outdoor play equipment will also be included, practitioner and support staff skills development, as well as psychosocial programs for practitioners. So you can see that a combination of those elements will make up a really nice ECD program that will actually have a meaningful impact on the lives of those children. The target organizations in this program are obviously the ECDs, daycares, and creches. They can be fully or partially registered, and we would like to see the partially registered ones moving towards full registration through the provision of the NLC funding. In terms of gender-based violence, obviously a very important program for us. We have the unfortunate reputation of being one of the most violent countries in the world when it comes to GBV. So this is a really critical intervention that needs to be strengthened and supported. So the overall goal is to increase access for women and children to integrated and comprehensive survivor-focused prevention and response programs, as well as strengthening advocacy and policy interventions, because we can't ever address the problem of GBV unless we address the underlying causes, which are things like norms and social structures. So there is an important advocacy and attitude awareness component to the program. In the short term, we want to see increased access to support services for the survivors of GBV, and in the medium term, increased social and economic opportunities, as well as increased public awareness and changing attitudes around GBV in South Africa. So the interventions, again, it'll be a combination of two or more of the following: education and advocacy. We would like to see things like policy changes as well as procedures to protect and support victims, renovations to existing facilities so that we can have more safe houses, particularly in rural areas where this is a critical need, where often these facilities are not available. Maintenance and improvements to existing infrastructure, as well as holistic survivor-centered services, which can include things like counseling, healthcare or referrals, support groups, legal information and advice, as well as training, entrepreneurial training and skills development for the clients. And here we're targeting NPOs or NPCs or public benefit trusts who have aligned objectives to the program. Okay, protection of the vulnerable. The overall goal is to increase access to integrated, community-based and/or residential wellness and support services. And please take note of the vulnerable groups. So this year we've defined them quite specifically. So we're focusing on orphans and vulnerable children, older persons, people with disabilities, as well as chronic illnesses. And in the guidelines, or in the advertisement rather, you can see the kinds of chronic illnesses that we're referring to. They are listed there. Short-term outcomes would be increased access to the facilities or services for those various vulnerable groups, and in the medium term, improved social, physical, and economic outcomes as appropriate. So, for example, it could be rehabilitation if you're a program that's dealing with addiction, independent living if it's people with disabilities, and improved health status if it's something around chronic illness or other forms of illness. The interventions to be funded, once again, a combination. So the programmatic approach continues. So basic care, obviously that's where we start, food, clothing, and shelter. But then in addition to that, we want to see programs that offer life skills, enrichment stimulation, counseling, and so on, depending on the needs of the particular target group. Foster care placements for children, access to healthcare or referrals to healthcare, again, legal information and advice if it's necessary, entrepreneurial training and skills development as appropriate, and special needs educational services. And again, NPOs, NPCs, and PBTs who have aligned objectives to the program. All right, the new program is around food security. And here we took a decision that we didn't just want to hand out food parcels because that isn't sustainable over the longer term. And we want to move towards a situation where food security actually enables other things happening in the community as well. So it's not just about providing food, but it gives an opportunity for developing resilience and agency in communities. So the overall goal is to improve food security in vulnerable households through the local sustainable production and distribution of safe and nutritious food. The short-term outcomes are increased access to safe and nutritious food for vulnerable households and improved nutrition in those households through dietary diversity and education. In the medium term, we would like to see increased individual and community self-reliance, resilience, and agency through the development of sustainable local food production systems. There's a lot of interesting work going on in this sector around how community if communities kind of coalesce and gather around the development of a food system, it has other benefits as well. So that is one of the medium-term outcomes that we'd like to see. So the interventions, it's a combination of the following two activities. It's food production strategies. They must be localized and they must be sustainable. So things like food gardens as complementary measures to social security and other situations. And then the promotion of good nutritional practices at household level. And then again, NPOs and NPCs and PBTs with aligned objectives. So we're looking for organizations that have experience and know-how in the food security space, not just somebody deciding, oh, let me start a vegetable garden today and calling themselves a food security organization, because it is quite a specialized and you need to know what you're doing around food security. All right, then the last program under Charities is animal welfare. This has been missing from our call for applications for a couple of years, but we've decided to reintroduce it. And one of the key things is that we need to make sure that poor communities also have access to services that reduce harms in those local communities. So the overall goal is to improve the welfare of companion and working animals in a manner that reduces harms and contributes to the benefit, health, and safety of poor communities. In the short term, we'd like to see an increase in the number of animals that receive veterinary or general care, as well as increased community outreach that promotes animal health, welfare protection, and safety issues. And then in the medium term, positive attitudes and increased knowledge of animal sentience, welfare, behavior care, and zoonotic disease prevention, very important. We all know that although we can't be sure of the cause of COVID-19, but there's a lot of evidence to suggest that it did come from an animal source. So that's something that we need to take increasing cognizance of, as well as improved welfare and care of domestic animals and livestock in the target communities, and then the reduction of uncontrolled reproduction. So things like sterilization that will reduce the number of strays and unwanted animals. So the interventions, again, a combination of two or more, providing veterinary care for animals, as well as deworming, vaccinations and sterilization, including mobile animal clinics so that we can reach more rural and remote areas, education and awareness programs, shelter provision for strays and unwanted animals, inspectorates to make sure that people are adhering to the animal welfare laws and that there isn't illegal activity going on like dog fighting and so on, and then advocacy campaigns regarding the humane treatment of animals, as well as the existing legislation that is there so that people are aware of what they need to do to keep their animals safe and healthy. And here again, we're looking for NPOs, NPCs, and PBTs that are aligned. So animal welfare organizations or animal care centers or care units that have been working in this space. Okay, that is it for charities. I'll just move on to arts, culture, and national heritage. I realize this is a very lengthy presentation and I do apologize for the length, but I'm sure all of you are anxious to hear the details so that you can ask your questions at the end. So I'm just going to pause for a sip of water if you don't mind.
Apologies, Sarah, I've lost your sound. I'm not sure, colleagues, if it's just me.
Sarah, could you check on your headphones?
Yes, we've lost your sound, Sarah. Are you back?
I'm back. Can you hear me now?
Yes,
we can
perfect.
hear you.
Thank you.
Okay, sorry. I don't know why it was unmuted, but there was obviously some other issue. Okay, so as I was saying, the overall goal of the arts, culture, and national heritage sector is to contribute to nation building and social cohesion through the sustainable development, promotion, and transformation of the arts, our national heritage, and culture. And the same preference conditions apply through all the sectors, so I won't repeat them. So under Arts, Culture and National Heritage, we have the 3 programs. So this year we've taken a slightly different approach. In the past, you might have seen different programs for the different subsectors, but this year we've tried to have a more integrated approach. So we've introduced a new program, which we're calling the School Arts, Culture and Heritage Development Program. Then we have an Arts, Culture and Cultural Heritage Development Program more broadly, as well as a focus on natural heritage and the environment. So in terms of the schools program, here we want to make a contribution to the development and expansion of arts, culture and heritage programs in schools. And the intention is to build children's self-esteem. So a lot of research has shown that arts programs in an educational setting actually have a broader benefit than just children enjoying the actual program. But there's evidence to suggest that they improve things like social and educational outcomes. So we think that this is a very important aspect of the school curriculum that we want to make a contribution to, but with a focus on rural and disadvantaged communities. So schools where they might not have the kind of program, or they want to expand the existing program that they have and make it more meaningful for the children. So increased cultural and heritage awareness, appreciation, and participation is essentially the overall goal. In terms of short-term outcomes, access to the arts, whether it's visual or literacy, so access to arts education, as well as cultural heritage education for children and young people, particularly young people with disabilities, because this can be a very important way of ensuring inclusion of those children. Children and young people exposed to the performing, visual and literary arts, as well as to cultural heritage, and then job creation for graduates and young people through the program. In terms of short-term outcomes, this is the 4th short-term outcome, promotion of literacy, multilingualism, and Indigenous knowledge in schools through the creative arts and through the cultural heritage education. So the interventions to be funded will be a combination of 1, 2, and 3, with 4 and 5 as options. So 1, 2, and 3 talk to the implementation of the arts, culture, or heritage program in the school, which includes exposure to different forms of arts, culture, and heritage, as well as environments and things like national days and so on. The creation of ensembles for music, drama, and dance, as well as the creation of new or original works in all formats that educate and celebrate the diverse cultural heritage that we have in South Africa. And then an annual production or some kind of demonstration or exhibition by the learners, which showcases what they've learned and the skills that they've gained through their participation. In terms of elective optional components, it's accredited training for educators in arts and arts-based education, as well as for heritage practitioners, so if they want to formalize or upskill themselves, as well as participation in competitions. So if the school would like to start participating in Eisteddfods with their choir or other forms of competition at the local and district level, then that can also be included in the application. And it's a wonderful way for kids to learn and learn about performance, learn about teamwork, and showcase and have their self-esteem built through their participation in these competitions. So here the target group is arts, culture and heritage or education MPOs that are working with school children from disadvantaged and rural areas. So we'd like to see partnerships between these NPOs and the schools. But schools can also apply as schools themselves if they want to implement something like this, but then we would want to see their NPO partner as well being part of the program. In terms of arts, culture and cultural heritage development, here the overall goal is slightly different. So we've noticed a trend that arts and culture organizations often struggle with sustainability. So the focus of the program this year is to focus on capacitating those organizations to become more sustainable through income generation and job creation. So to become more like businesses, not necessarily businesses in the classic sense of the word, but at least to ensure that they have a more entrepreneurial focus or entrepreneurial component to the work that they do. And to improve talent, to develop talent and improve the quality of arts, culture and heritage practice in South Africa, and then to stimulate and promote excellence in all areas. In terms of short-term outcomes, we want organizations to create and market products, job and income opportunities for their participants or their members, and then to develop talent and capacitate the participants to move on to and showcase their talent on bigger platforms. And then in the medium term, broad-based access to the arts and culture and heritage for audiences, or whether as audiences or participants, but to all people in South Africa. And then communities being exposed to arts, culture and heritage that they might not necessarily have had access to otherwise. So in terms of interventions to be funded, again, there are 3 which are required and 2 which are optional. So 1, 2, and 3, it's the implementation of the community-based program. So programs that develop creativity and build a strong platform for the arts and culture, as well as heritage. The creation of ensembles, whether it's music or dance, representing all cultural groups, as well as things like visual arts, pottery and beadwork, and so on. And again, production or exhibition by the participants so they can demonstrate and showcase their skills and talents. Then the optional ones are accredited training for practitioners or directors or managers in things like business management and administration, project management, product development, marketing, etc. And this obviously links back to the overall goal of improving the sustainability and marketability of the products. And then training and skills development for artists or practitioners in the field if they want to, again, upskill and formalize their qualifications. So here we're targeting arts, culture and heritage, NPOs, NPCs, or public benefit trusts. Okay, the last program under arts is natural heritage and environment. And here we've tried to combine the natural heritage aspect, which is things like geographic areas, wetlands, or important sites of biodiversity and ecosystems that need to be protected, as well as environmental initiatives that could be introduced in communities to restore and conserve their particular environment. So the overall goal is environmental protection, conservation, and restoration, as well as adaptation to climate change. And this is a very important component. So how can we make sure that we develop the capacity of communities to adapt to the climate changes that are almost inevitably going to, in fact, we've seen them already happening in areas of either flooding or drought. This is a big concern for sub-Saharan Africa. So we need to find ways for communities to adapt and to move towards low carbon development pathways. But the intention is to say, how can those adaptations also result in improved socioeconomic outcomes and secure livelihoods for those communities? And then the other overall goal is around awareness, so appreciation, awareness, and participation by the public in our natural heritage and in preservation and conservation of the environment. So the short-term outcomes are increased awareness, appreciation, and participation in environmental issues, as well as community participation in natural heritage and environmental conservation and the sustainable use of natural heritage assets. Over the medium term, we would want to see natural heritage areas and local ecosystems restored, conserved, and protected, sustainable land and water management and nature-based solutions for reducing climate vulnerability, and again, improve livelihoods through job creation and retention and income generated from the sustainable use of these assets. So the interventions are programs to protect, develop, or conserve or restore our natural heritage and local ecosystems, as well as areas of biodiversity, including things like regenerative agricultural practices and the application of indigenous knowledge. And then the development of sustainable, innovative solutions to energy poverty through research and policy advocacy. And here we're looking at organizations that are working in this sector. So they need to have experience and a track record. So organizations that are working to preserve or restore natural environments and indigenous knowledge systems, as well as research institutes that are working in community outreach programs, but they must be linked to a higher education institution. And the reason for this is just to make sure that the research is robust and replicable. So essentially it's about finding ways to apply the research in a community in a way that will achieve the goals of the program. All right, the last one, sport and recreation. Sorry, not the last one, there's also miscellaneous, but we're almost at the end. So sport and recreation is slightly different from the other sectors in that it has a very specific goal, which is to contribute to the development of an equitable, accessible, sustainable, and competitive national sport and recreation system. And this is in line with the white paper as well as the goals of the Department of Sport and Recreation. So under sport and recreation, we have 3 programs and all of them contribute to the overall goal. So school sport, obviously, if you want to develop sport in the country, you have to start at school level because sport is a long game. So school sport, a very important program for us, as well as the development of local, provincial, regional, and district federations and national federations. So we're looking at the entire system, the entire value chain of sport, from the very grassroots right up to the elite level. So in terms of the school sport program, the overall goal is to contribute to the growth of sport and to a healthy nation by increasing levels of learner participation in sport and recreation, which can include Indigenous sport, with a special focus on girls, learners with disabilities, as well as rural communities. The short-term outcomes would be an increase in sporting activities or sporting programs, particularly in rural and poor schools, an increase in learner participation, whether it's through formal sport or recreation activities, including Indigenous sport, and then an increase in club and league competition by the schools that are part of the program. And then in the medium term, an increase in the schools' leagues in the various sporting codes. We know some sporting codes are very active in schools, others less so. So we'd like to see new and interesting codes being introduced into the school competitive system. And then the improved performance and increased participation of learners, particularly those designated groups that I mentioned earlier, in the schools leagues. And this is a way to build grassroots capacity, to develop talent, to coach and support young athletes through their school sporting career so that then they can go on to participate as adults later. So the interventions to be funded would be a combination again. Sporting infrastructure, obviously that's very important. You can't play sport without the relevant infrastructure. So development or improvement in the targeted schools, equipment and apparel for the athletes and the learners. And here we would like to see an element of local economic development as well. So we encourage schools to use local producers to source their equipment and their apparel locally as much as possible. Recreational activities for learners as part of the school sport program, which can include Indigenous sport. And then for the federations, we're looking at coach, official, administrator, and sport skills development, as well as the placement of coaches in schools. And here we'd like, again, to see partnerships. So there could be a partnership between the sports NPO and a number of schools in the same area to share a coach or to share a coordinator. Or schools could get together and decide to do that as well. And then participation in local and regional leagues and competitions, including schools leagues. And here the target groups are public schools located in disadvantaged rural areas or serving disadvantaged communities, as well as associate members of the federations that specifically are set up to develop school sport. Okay, the second program is the federations, the subnational federations. And this is something that is a slightly new target for us. So we have had federations before, but the tendency has been to focus more on the bigger national organizations at the expense of the subnational structures. And we realized through our evaluation and consultation process that that was something of a gap. So we're really keen to make sure that the mid-level of the federation component or the federation part of the schools of the sport value chain is developed as well, so that they can also contribute to the development of sport. So the overall goal is to contribute to the development and transformation of sport for the designated groups through club and federation development, particularly in the townships and the rural areas, as well as with disadvantaged communities, women, and people with disabilities. And then the outcomes would be the progressive attainment of the transformation targets in the selected sporting codes, And I know that not all sporting codes fall under the Transformation Charter, but even if you don't, we still want to see your transformation plan, which must be submitted with your application, telling us what your current statistics look like in terms of diversity and participation, and where you would like to see yourself in 3 years' time as part of your application. And then obviously your program must then support the attainment of those targets. So the interventions to be funded, again, it's a combination. So it's club and federation development, which includes things like training of officials, coaches and administrators, strengthening of your organizational systems and governance, very important, as well as strengthening of your monitoring, evaluation, reporting and learning systems. It's very difficult for us to track progress in the sports system if we don't have good data, and we rely on the federations for that data. So this will help us to build a picture of how sport is changing in terms of demographics and representation. Talent identification and development, athlete and coach support programs, participation in competition, whether it's domestic or national, and then equipment and apparel for clubs. So you'll note that this year clubs cannot apply individually. They have to apply under the auspices of their federation. And as part of your application, you must send us a list of the clubs that you are supporting, detailing the nature of the support and confirming that the clubs are aware of that application, that they have actually agreed to it as well. So that all of that detail will be in the application pack. And then the target group here is federations below national level, including the associate members. All right, the last group under sport is national federations. This is something that the NLC has been funding for a number of years and will continue to do so, because it's obviously a very important component of our sporting activities. And it's to contribute to the development and transformation of sport at the elite level. But obviously that will not happen unless the other pipelines are developed. So hence the focus on school and subnational value as well. The outcomes are the progressive attainment of transformation targets in the sporting codes. And again, we would want the federations to submit their transformation plan. The interventions to be funded would be federation development, similar to the other program. And then for the national federations, it's athlete and coach support programs at the appropriate level, pre-departure camps for the target groups, as well as participation in national and international competition. And here the target group is national federations, as well as associate members of federations and macro bodies. Okay, the last sector is miscellaneous, and miscellaneous is a small but nevertheless important sector, because essentially it caters for things that fall outside of the three main sectors. So under miscellaneous, the funding areas are programs that respond to emergencies, disasters, and catastrophic events, so that we have the opportunity to be responsive as the NLC. If there's a need for an emergency intervention, we can do that, as well as programs that fall outside arts, culture, and national heritage, charities, or sport and recreation. But just to note that if your program is not included under the sector-based programs, but would fall under a sector in general terms, you can't come in under miscellaneous, unfortunately, because this is for other kinds of applications that wouldn't be covered by a sector-based program. And all of the conditions apply as with the other sectors. So just a little quote at the end of the presentation. It's a lot of changes. Saneli's talked about some of the changes, and you'll see in the way that the call has been put together this year that we've tried to be as progressive and as developmental as we can, while managing expectations, as well as trying to balance what the funder is trying to do, which is Fund for Impact, as well as being responsive to what organizations are trying to do through the application process. So it's a difficult balancing act, but we hope we're getting there. And then just the quote, which I think all of us need to take heed of, is that the pessimist complains about the wind, the optimist expects it to change, and the realist adjusts the sail. So all of us are going to have to be realists moving forward and adjust our way of doing things so that we can all get to the ultimate goal, which is to improve the conditions of the organizations, communities, and people that we were set up to serve. And that is the end of my presentation, and I apologize for the length, but I think it was important to just make sure that everything was covered.
Thank you so much, Sarah. That was indeed one very comprehensive presentation. And by the looking at our Facebook page, you can see that there is a general positive uptake of everything that has been presented so far. And I can frankly tell you now that our prospective applicants, our stakeholders, are definitely realists. They are definitely realists. I've not seen a single comment that shows that, you know, there is some pessimism. It looks very positive. Thank you so much, Sarah. We are going to go straight into the frequently asked questions before we take the Q&A. As per our live streaming. So in terms of the frequently asked questions, we are going to just basically, you know, assign a question and try to respond as much as we can. I'm going to share a screen. Just to check if it's visible.
Yes, it's visible. We can see it.
All right, thank you. This one, I think, Mr. Dlamini, we have applied 3 to 4 times and were declined because of budget depletion. We have lost hope. How can we increase our chances of being considered for funding?
Yeah, it's an interesting question, and which I think I would have attempted to touch on it earlier when I was doing the overview. Thank you for the question, though. It's an issue of protecting the cake, really. From the NLC perspective, what we have learned is that there is a lot of our resources or of the grant funding that goes into the wrong hands. So we therefore are improving these processes just to make sure that we protect the fund and we only target deserving organizations. I think even the way the call has been crafted, it's intended to ensure that it goes to the right hands. So it's the issue of the demand exceeding the supply. That is what we have been dealing with in the past. But having gone into detail in terms of the analysis, we learned that it's not because there is too much demand. The demand was coupled with the people that had wrong intentions. They did not come to the NLC for the good causes that they intended to implement, but they came to the organization with an intention of defrauding the organization. So we are now saying the stringent measures are going to assist in terms of safeguarding the cake and ensuring that we fund the right organizations that have the intentions of good causes. What I could therefore say, directly related to the question that you've asked, the applicants and the stakeholders, as well as the general public, should not lose hope. We are heading for the right direction in terms of the good work that we've implemented and the amendments of the processes, just to make sure that everyone gets to, to get access to the funding. Now, if I were to do projections, as I reflected the figures earlier in terms of the trends, it would have been clear that in the previous years, we were receiving applications right up to about 7,000, up to 9,000 applications in the previous financial year. Projected in the current financial year, we are looking at reducing those numbers drastically because of the measures that you've put, but also the filters that are in the system that are going to assist for us to target correctly in terms of the organizations that will be funding. So that is basically what I would say to the general public. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Whilst you are at it, Mr. Dlamini, you have been mentioning the issue of the cake. Maybe it's at this point when you can just share in terms of the allocated percentages per sector from the revenue we generate from the operator. Maybe you can just share in terms of how much percentage goes to charities, how much goes to sports, how much goes to arts, how much goes to miscellaneous. Thank you.
Yeah, I think because we are in a very transparent organization, we just want to put things out in the open and for the general public to have an idea of what we are dealing with as the National Lotteries Commission. I could just even give a rough figure in terms of what we are looking at in the current financial year in terms of the allocations. I think the current financial year, we've got just over 1.4 billion that we'll be working with in terms of the allocations. And obviously the 47% of that will be going to the charities sector. The 23% will be going to the arts, 28% going to the sports and recreation, and the 2% allocated for miscellaneous. As Sarah would have mentioned earlier, that miscellaneous is our smallest sector. So the 2% is allocated to that. So that is how the percentage breakdown looks like.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much, Mr. Dlamini. We still have an active project. Can we apply for funding now? And secondly, do you fund cooperatives? I think I can respond to these two questions. If there is still an active project, you may not be able to apply for funding until the project is reported on and closed. And I think Mr. Dlamini mentioned earlier on that at the moment, we also do not fund cooperatives. Where can we get assistance in completing the application forms? And what are management accounts? Mr. Dlamini mentioned earlier on as well that provincial offices are there to provide assistance with completing the forms, and we are discouraging our applicants to pay for this particular service. The provincial offices have this responsibility. Sarah, do you want to respond on the management accounts?
Yes, I can do that, no problem. So management accounts are essentially what an organization would use to track their expenditure during the implementation of their project or program. So it would be things like an income and expenditure report. So how much money came in, what was it spent on, what is the balance, and so forth. So it's just a way for the organization to keep track of its spending, to make sure that it's sticking to its budget, to make sure that it has enough money to run its affairs correctly. So we'd want to see when an organization submits those documents, they need to either have it done by a bookkeeper, so that we can have assurance that it's a third party has had a look at the accounts and can verify that they do reflect the actual financial transactions that the organization is claiming, or they have to submit some kind of evidence in the form of a bank statement. So if it can just be a very simple income and expenditure statement, as well as a balance sheet that shows your assets and liabilities, and then some kind of supporting evidence to show that either somebody else has looked at those accounts and can say that they do fairly represent what the organization is stating, or that the bank statements correspond to what the management accounts are saying.
Thank you so much for that, Sarah. Can we apply to renovate a house we are leasing for the purpose of our program? And the second one, our accounting officer is still busy with our audit for year ending 31 March 2023. Can we apply for funding? May I give this one to you, Mr. Dlamini? Can we apply to renovate a house we are leasing for the purpose of our program?
Yeah, there is nothing wrong with applying to renovate a house, but that you are using for the program. But what becomes important is obviously the declaration that the house belongs to the organization that has applied for funding. The reason why we want that declaration, it's because we cannot renovate a house and 6 months down the line, the owner of the house comes and takes the house and goes away and says, no, this is my house. You guys get out. We therefore want to make sure that the house that you're going to renovate has the right papers in the name of the organization. This could be a lease. It must be a long-term lease that is given to the organization by the owners of the house, or it might be a title deed that the house belongs to the organization, so that we therefore can, be rest assured that there is no one that is going to have a claim on the public funds that would have been invested in upgrading the house or renovating the house. So yes, you can, but you must provide proof that the house belongs to the organization.
No, that is correct, Mr. Dlamini. I think the one around the accounting officer is still busy with our audit. What we are saying is the NLC is that you need to furnish us with the most recent financial statements. So if your year ending is 31 March 2023, but you do have the 31 March 2022, you can still apply. The next one, our program is not included in the funding focus areas. Can we apply under miscellaneous purposes? That's the first one. We only need a backup solution, which is a solar system or a borehole. Can we apply for funding? Those are the two questions. Those are the two questions. Sarah, can I take these two to you?
Yes, that's fine. So as I mentioned in the presentation, the miscellaneous purposes, if you read the legislation, the miscellaneous purposes fund is for any other matter that doesn't fall under the three sectors. So for that reason, unfortunately, if your program is, for example, a sports program, but the actual it doesn't fit into the programs that we've defined for this particular call, then unfortunately you can't come in under miscellaneous as well, because that would defeat the purpose of having the fund, which is for any other matter. So that is the position at this stage. Can I take the next one as well?
Yes, please.
Okay, so the backup solution, as I mentioned, it's supposed to be an elective that goes with an existing program. So I think in the way that the advert has been published, it wouldn't be possible to just apply for that. We would need to see some other kind of part of your application that talks about the actual program that you are delivering to the beneficiary group. So it can be part of an existing program, but it can't be a standalone.
Thank you for that, Sarah. Moving forward, I think we are done with our frequently asked questions. Let me just go back. Just a second. Thank you. I think at this point, we are just going to go straight to the Q&A, the questions that people have posed and penned on our Facebook page. We will start off with just a few questions. It's the question around the closing date. When are we closing our call for applications? I think Mr. Dlamini already responded in a sense that what determines our closure is the availability of funds. So if funds are still available, then we will still continue with the distribution. Sarah, you've already responded on what is miscellaneous. There's been quite a few questions on what is meant by a miscellaneous application. I think you've already responded to that. I think this one, may I take it to you, Jody? It's around accessing the documents, sharing the documents with the public and stakeholders of the results of the environmental scan that NLC would have undertaken to determine the funding focus areas. May I take that one to you? And maybe if I can allow you to respond to that one, please, Jody.
Thanks, Nabushle. I think let me toss this one to Sarah, because I think she would be better placed in terms of the results and how the research areas came about, Nabushle. So apologies for this one. Sarah, this is your call.
Thanks, Jody. Yeah, so we commission an environmental scan every year. It's kind of one of our regular things that's on our research agenda. And we normally get a service provider to do it for us, simply because obviously looking at an environmental scan is a very broad thing. And so we don't have internal capacity to do it ourselves. And it usually gets included in the annual performance plan. So if you go and look at the annual performance plan that's uploaded on the website, you'll see there the full environmental scan is there. That document is there included in the plan. So it is a public document as far as I know. So that is, but just to also emphasize that the environmental scan isn't the only document that we look at. Obviously it informs our decision making, but it isn't the only thing. So there are other pieces of research that we do, as well as consultations and various things that all contribute towards the creation of the funding areas. But that environmental scan is part of the APP as far as I know.
Okay, yes, thank you so much for that. So in other words, it's available for the public to access. They can just go into our website and within the APP, they will find the environmental scan document as requested. The other questions are around clarity on the inclusions and exclusions. A question is around, protection of the vulnerable, whether orphaned and vulnerable children, the elderly, etc., are included in the focus area. So I think maybe if we can just provide clarity as to, the list is not exhaustive. Am I correct, Sarah, Mr. Dlamini? It's not exhaustive. So if it's a vulnerable group, they are included in the protection of the vulnerable.
You are quite correct.
A spanner then, on the wheel. There's a question around the homeless. Why are we excluding the homeless? Because they are also vulnerable, and homelessness in South Africa is one of the most touchy subjects, if I may put it like that. So maybe is there a reason why we have not specifically included the homeless in our vulnerable groups?
Yeah, maybe if I could come in. I don't think the word exclusion is actually explaining what would have happened here. It's more about prioritization in terms of the targeting. We target in relation to prioritization, but we are not saying the homeless are less affected by the conditions they live under. So it's more about, in the upcoming financial year, we may have to consider the homeless as well in terms of, you know, how we focus and we move forward. But for the current financial year and the amount of money that is available for grant funding, we then had to do the prioritization, and this is what would have prioritized in relation to how Sarah would have unpacked it in the current call. Yeah, that is the approach.
Thank you, Mr. Dlamini. I hope our prospective applicant has been answered. Some of the questions are in relation to the financial statements. Where an organization has not had any income, and you find that the financial statements, you know, don't have any tangible figures. What is our stand as the NLC when it comes to that specific situation? They've been operating, but there hasn't been any income, and no figures are reflecting in the financial statements. So what is our stand as the NLC when it comes to that?
Perhaps I could come in there.
Please do, Sarah.
Yeah. So I think if an organization hasn't had any income for a number of years and therefore cannot show us any financial activity on their books, I think that for us would mean that we would have to look at that organization a bit more closely, because our assumption is that if an organization is operating, serving the public, doing good work, that there should at least be some form of income, even if it's a little amount from a cake sale or whatever it is. But to have had absolutely no income at all and to operate and provide a service to people, I think then we would have to do a bit more digging. So that's something where, for example, in a site visit as part of the pre-adjudication process, if the application looked good in all other respects, but there was just this question around why is there no income, I think we would have to just do more detailed investigation and come up with a reason as to why that is the case, and then based on the findings of that inspection or that visit to the organization, we would then make a recommendation based on the information that we uncover. But to me, it seems unlikely that an organization would have had absolutely no income at all if they were operating and providing a service.
Yeah, you are definitely correct. Do you want to add on to that, Mr. Dlamini?
Yeah, yes, I just wanted to also add to what Sarah is saying, because there is another tool that we seek to introduce in the current financial year. We call it our risk matrix. The tool intends to pick up on such things. For instance, you've got an organization that has applied with the National Lottery, but does not have financials. Then we rate it in relation to our risk matrix, which will then determine the site visit that we need to visit them and test for their capacity as well. Because, you know, with financial statements, you get to read quite a few things about the organization. It's not just the money that flows in, but it's also about the capacity of the organization, the systems of the organization. You get to read in the financial statements. So if there is an organization that will submit and may have those shortcomings, the risk matrix should be able to identify. Then we must be able to visit that organization and then be able to support them going forward. We then will have to refer them to capacity building, but that information that we'll gather during the site visit will form part of the adjudication, so that we are then able to whether support them based on the credibility of their program. Thanks.
Thank you so much, Mr. Dlamini. Jody, please go ahead.
Thank you, Nobuhle. I think just to reiterate the point that Sanele has made, and I see there are lots of questions around financial statements and you know, one of the interventions that we're putting in place is as part of this inspectorate function prior to adjudication, a team of you know, individuals from the NLC will come and visit potential or applicants to look and verify, because that was one of the problems that we had in the past, is that we paid and we didn't verify whether the building existed, whether the NPO was, you know, able to manage even the funds. So Sanele mentioned capacity building, and I'd like to talk about that, because one of the areas that I'm certainly very interested in rolling out is looking at applicants and our beneficiaries and looking at capacity building. So if there is a need for, you know, financial literacy, or if beneficiaries feel that they're not quite up to speed on these areas, let us know, because then what we can do on our side, we can collate these obviously on a provincial level, and then look and determine how we can best assist and intervene. Because part of our mandate, we also have a very strong development mandate. We're an implementing agent of government, and we have to develop the nation in ways that, you know, fit into our mandate. So that's certainly something that I would also like to ask applicants when they get visited, to actually also articulate some of these skills gaps or areas that they'd like development on, so we can then look at those and see how we can fit that in, so that, you know, we grow all of our skills collectively as we go through these processes. Thank you.
Thank you so much for that, Jody. I think it's going to really revive some hope that we are not just strengthening our controls just because we want to close the gates, but we do have that element of wanting to be developmental and assisting more. Thank you so much for that, Judy. Sarah, you wanted to add something?
Yes, just to add that obviously in terms of the Nonprofit Organizations Act, organizations are required to submit financial statements on an annual basis. So otherwise they get deregistered. So we would also want to understand from the organization, if they didn't have AFS, what was the reason why. So that would be part of the inquiry as well.
Yep, definitely. You are correct. Thank you for that, Sarah. I just want us to clear some of the gray areas, looking at, you know, the similar questions that we are getting from our Facebook. Let us maybe try and clarify the issue of land. Do we fund land? Do we fund land? That's the first one. I think we need to just really clear that gray area. Do we fund land? Secondly, historically, as the NLC would be saying, we do not fund intermediaries. So you are an organization, you are working with ECDs, you want to be funded for trainings that you want to provide to ECDs. So I think we need to clear those gray areas so that our applicants are sure that it's either you already have a structure in that land and you just have a proof of ownership. Do we fund intermediaries, or we still do not fund intermediaries? Would you like to attempt that question, Sarah?
I'll do my best. Look, I don't think I think we'd have to look at it on a case-by-case basis, and these are decisions that the adjudicators ultimately will have to make. If an organization can give a compelling reason why land should be funded, then as part of a program, then I'm not saying it's completely out of the question, but there would need to be a substantial motivation or justification as to why that was necessary, as well as assurance that the land ownership issues were all correct and in place. So usually when an organization acquires a property, for example, there will be a piece of land that goes with it. Obviously, a public school has access to land around its buildings. So most of the time, it's not necessarily to just buy a piece of land. But again, with the food security program, maybe there could be a justification for saying, well, in order for us to install a particular agricultural initiative, then we need to purchase this property. So if it was part of an integrated program and there was a reasonable motivation, then I'm sure the distributing agencies would look at it. In terms of the service providers to organizations, yes, historically we haven't funded them. It's a tricky one because normally those kinds of services would be funded through, for example, a supply chain process rather than as a direct grant to an organization, because they're essentially, supplying an educational or a training product. But one of the things that we will probably look at during the course of this year is around an intervention into the curriculum of ECDs. It's just an idea that's floating at the moment, requires further work, but there might be a concept document that comes around how we can look at enhancing and further developing and supporting the curriculum in the ECD sector. But it's still, as I say, just the germ of an idea at this stage. Further work is being done, more research, and it may turn into a program, it may not. But at the moment, service providers are not supported in generally. The funding is targeted towards organizations that actually provide a direct service to the grantee, to the beneficiary rather.
Yeah, thank you so much for that, Sarah. Schools, the question is, can they apply for both a sports program and an arts program in one application form? I can respond to that. The answer is no, because we are speaking to different sectors, and it's not going to be possible to apply for both programs, and especially in one financial year, in one call, it's not going to be possible. Esports, there's a question around esports, computer games. As the NLC, do we consider that as part of sports? I'm just tabling this one. I don't know who to assign it to. Esports, do we consider that as sports as the NLC?
Yeah, if I were to take a first bite on that, I think similarly to how I would have responded to the other matter in terms of priority, I would like to position it in the same way, to say we have always focused on the traditional sport in terms of, your normal sporting codes. I mean, the e-sport could be an innovation kind of an approach. It would come with your fourth industrial revolution and those kinds of things. The organization still has to conduct research behind esport so that we make sure that we then respond correctly when we decide to intervene. Yes, there has been discussions since there is a move towards implementing innovative solutions and the fourth industrial revolution. We are also digitizing our platforms, our environment as NLC. So we are moving the direction. So then there is going to have to be research that our research unit conducts around esport so that we get to position it correctly in our funding processes as well. So that is the kind of thing. It's about us evolving and, also getting to understand the space better. Thanks.
Thank you so much, Mr. Dlamini. It's still under consideration. Is that what you are saying? So it's not yet there.
In the essence, that's what we are saying. Yes.
Okay. The arts and culture a project as well. I think one thing that probably needs clarity is on the schools arts. There's like quite a few questions on. Okay, it's almost like we are saying schools may only access funding through an NPO. So maybe let's try and clarify that area in terms of the hybrid approach. Do you want to attempt that one, Mr. Dlamini? You are already on the podium.
Yeah, I think the emphasis is exactly how you've captured it. The school on its own can apply, as well as the NPO that works with the school can apply. So it's that kind of a hybrid approach. We are saying the school, submit your applications. That is if you've got an arts program that you are implementing in the school. But if there is an NPO that seeks to work with a specific school, they then need to sign some kind of an agreement. There must be an agreement for them to be able to work together. And that agreement, we need to have a view of as the National Lotteries Commission, because we therefore cannot approve funding that this NPO will work in the school, and yet the school is not aware of that. And we also are going to have to visit the project prior to us considering it going forward. So to answer your question, yes, it's a hybrid approach. The school can apply, but the organization that works with the school can also apply. Thanks.
Thank you so much. Last but not least, it's the issue of federations. The question is, our guidelines have clearly stated that federations will need to apply for their direct affiliates. How will that pan out? Are the clubs, the affiliates, expected to complete an application and submit it to a federation? Or a federation will on its own complete an application to also accommodate its affiliates? How will this one pan out? Just some clarity on that one.
Directed to?
I'm tabling it, I'm putting it out there.
Just putting it out there.
Question.
Okay, let me try. So Dele will come in if necessary. So yeah, one of the things that we're trying to avoid is lots and lots and lots of tiny applications, because that's been the trend in the sports sector, unfortunately. And it's just not cost effective. The cost benefit ratios are very low. So the idea is to try and do it more as a collective, as a sport movement. So I would say that we will actually, we're planning to have a separate session with federations specifically on the sport call, because we understand that it is a new approach. So we were discussing today just the logistics of setting that up as well, so that we can take federations through the process. But essentially, I think it has to be a consultation between the affiliate and the federation. So if the club has very specific programs and it's well thought out and it's well planned, then they can include it as part of the federation's application. On the other hand, it might be the case that the federation would have to go to the club and say, what is it that you need? What are your priorities? And then add it to the application. But essentially, it's around trying to build more democratic decision making, more holistic funding, more strategic funding for the sports sector. So federations and clubs are going to have to work together on this issue to come up with an application that makes sense for their code.
Yeah, thank you so much, Sarah, for that. Maybe just to mention that we've noted that there's quite a lot of questions on our Facebook page. We are going to ensure that we respond to all those questions that we've not been able to respond to. On our YouTube page, we will respond. But for now, I would like to ask Jody to give us some closing remarks. We have come to the end of our session. Over to you, Jody.
Thank you so much, Nabushle. Nabushle, I think we must also maybe just take all those questions from the Facebook page, respond to them, and perhaps put them on our website, so that, because I think there are some pertinent questions there. I think we've answered a few. I think there was one that I picked up about disclosing beneficiaries, and maybe before I do my closing remarks, let me just tackle that one. Certainly, I think we must just be mindful of POPIA and the requirements around that, but I certainly fully agree with you that we should be disclosing who's benefited and from our funding. It just helps with transparency, and I think one of the things we've seen particularly from many of the whistleblowers, is that it's been a big source of information for the SIU. So when, you know, somebody says, hey, but I belong to this NPO or this NPC, we didn't get that money, it also then helps us. So certainly fully support that. But if we can just have a process around that. I think, ladies and gentlemen and colleagues on the platform, it's been a really great afternoon, and apologies that I joined late. It was absolutely unavoidable. I think I want to just pick up a few points. I think Sanele has touched on largely on many of those. I think that given our you know, the Department of Trade, Industry and Competition is our shareholder ministry. They have given us very strong guidance in terms of our annual performance plans being a lot more driven and a lot more purposive. So we need to really scale up the impact of the work that we're doing. I think there's some research that's we're currently doing right now in terms of small grants and how we can look at this differently. So I think all of these initiatives that we've started is part of continuous improvement. So that next year when we have these sessions, we should be able to then say, we've been able to do this, we've learned a couple of lessons, but you know, we are continuously, and we're striving to continuously improve. So we've accepted this challenge by the DTIC that we need to really make a detailed impact. As part of our inspectorate function, we'll be going around, we'll be taking pictures pre and post, also building up some case studies, so there'd be opportunities for us to profile our beneficiaries, because I think that that's an area that we really need to ramp up, and that also is part of the work that we've committed to do with the DTIC. Then I think Saneli's also touched on important points around corruption. I think, ladies and gentlemen, I think you've read, you know, lots in the media, and it is you have the commitment from myself as the commissioner, from the board, the senior management team, that we are working to eradicate corruption. We would also like feedback from yourselves, and we'll be having I think we haven't done this in a while, an endeavor with our beneficiaries to talk about some of the pain points that you are experiencing, but also to share with you the new strategy, and we are hoping to do that around about in September. So I think we've taken quite a lot of lessons from the past in terms of processes, in terms of compliance, and the compliance is there to ensure that we ourselves as a commission remain a going concern, so that we can continue disbursing funds. The Auditor General has raised some concerns, our banks have raised concerns with us, and so we have to take these into account as we craft this new process forward. So we've made these commitments, and we are here to support and ensure that we actually grow the sector. I think the one big point that Sanel has also made is that we no longer have accredited agents. If anybody wants to charge you for the service, they should not be doing that. There are officials in our offices who get paid to do this work. So if you need that advice, that's where you go. You shouldn't be, somebody shouldn't be asking you to pay for that. And if you do get solicited in that way, please report that, because that's irregular, and it won't be tolerated, because we don't charge any fees. We have staff members who we pay, and this is their responsibilities to effect. So I think we're also needing all of you in the room to keep us honest, that where these instances of fraud, you're picking these up, please do the right thing and report these. There's we can also share the hotline number, the email address, because it's important that we work together to eradicate this. Because I agree with you. I think in some of the engagements I've had, people are angry at the Lotteries Commission because you feel we've misdirected funds. I want to assure you that working with the SIU, we're working to seize those assets and then bring that money back into the commission to ensure that we're able to right these wrongs. And then I think just on a last point, thank you very much to every one of you who've availed yourselves to make time to ask these questions, to be on this platform. It also helps us anticipate and plan. We've already started working on a revised process to look at our research areas for next year. So we'll also be informing you about the journey that we're going on. So that is something that's part of the continuous arrangements. But I think on my side, I'd like to welcome all of you to the new call. I wish you all the best of luck. And we are here and we are committed to assisting you to ensure that you are able to reach your objectives. So thank you, everyone. And thanks to the team for putting this together. It's really appreciated. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Jody, and panelists. Thank you so much for your participation. Our stakeholders and everybody else, thank you so much. We've come to the end of the session. Thank you and goodbye.
Thank you very much. Thank you.
Thank you. Thanks, Sanele. Thanks, Sarah. Thanks, Nobushle. Bye-bye.
Thank you all. Goodbye.
Regulating lotteries and funding for impact since 1999. The National Lotteries Commission is empowering communities today for a better future. The NLC has distributed over 25 billion to good causes. We are changing lives.